And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena that I call the wellness paradox. Now, in the first 12 episodes, you've heard me identify the wellness paradox as the gap between what we know as a health sciences community and what we actually do in the real world to make a real difference with real people. Spending some time reflecting on my definition of the wellness paradox through these first 12 episodes, what I've come to realize is that didn't quite capture what I thought the wellness paradox truly was. And that's why this episode 13, lucky number 13, is going to represent an inflection point for this podcast. Because when I started, I thought the way for me to be most effective and for this podcast to be the most effective medium was to speak to all of the health sciences and all of allied health. But what I've come to realize during these first 12 episodes with the amazing guests that we've had is that for me personally, how I feel that I can be most effective to improving human flourishing is solving a much deeper wellness paradox that exists for me, and I think will exist for many of our listeners. And as we're going to talk about in this episode, that paradox is the fact that we have an amazing community of fitness and wellness professionals that are armed with the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to truly help improve population and individual health in this country. Yet these individuals are divorced from the healthcare continuum. They're not a part of our healthcare delivery system. So episode 13 will represent a pivot point for the Wellness Paradox podcast. Now we're going to narrow our focus. We're going to point our laser in the direction of improving the scope of practice and helping fitness and wellness professionals level up their skills to actually become legitimate stakeholders on the healthcare continuum, to actually be part of the healthcare delivery system. And we're going to talk about this in a very personal way to me in this episode. Through the first 12 episodes, I've stayed in the background necessarily so and put the spotlight on our guests. But I think for us to make this pivot successfully and for everyone to have context for where I'm coming from, you need to hear a little bit about my story. And that's what we're going to talk about during this episode. And I truly think that my story is the same story that many fitness and wellness professionals tell about why they got into this industry and why they have such a passion for helping people. And to do that in this episode, I've brought in a very, very good friend of mine, Nate Langley. Nate has been helping me tell my story through one of my businesses, Applied Fitness Solutions, for over a decade now. And Nate is one of the more insightful, perceptive individuals that I've ever met. And we're dear friends. We love each other. We're basically brothers. And there's no better person that I can bring in to help me have this discussion of where the Wellness Paradox podcast is going and why it needs to go there than Nate. I'm very excited to be able to put this out there for everyone to understand the direction that we're moving. We're still going to provide the most engaging, most relevant information, but now it's going to be very, very focused on those who are in the fitness and the wellness coaching spaces. For me, this is something that resonates with me on a very soul level, as you're going to hear during the podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode. There will be a show notes page for this episode. As always, that can be found on wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 13. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I hope you're excited for the direction the podcast is going. And now I will turn it over to my good friend Nate and myself for episode 13, the transition of the Wellness Paradox podcast. Welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm definitely excited for this conversation today. As I said in the intro, this is going to be a little bit of a different conversation. And as I mentioned in the intro, I'm super excited to be joined by my good friend of over a decade now, Nate Langley. Nate, thanks for joining us today on the Wellness Paradox.
It's great to be here. Should I pretend like we didn't just have a conversation on another matter outside of this?
Yes, yeah, you probably should. Like, this is completely unique. But yeah, I'm excited to have Nate here today because Nate has been the person that has best helped me tell my story over the course of the past decade of my life with the company I started and with all the other ventures I've considered getting into. And in fact, Nate, and we've talked about this, you're the reason that I started this podcast. You were the one that gave me the push to get across the finish line and actually get this thing going. So I owe you a debt of gratitude for even being here right now.
Well, with you, Mike, it takes a little nudge, and then you tend to take it the rest of the way. So I'm really excited that when we had those initial conversations, it sort of sparked something in you. I don't know if we can get into it now, but like you've got a little bit of a journalism background. So I knew that to be able to get in front of the mic was going to be something that you would enjoy. So it's great to see you flourishing and already having some awesome guests on. And I'm enjoying listening. I just listened to the most recent one I heard, I think, was the Dr. Katz one, which is just great. If anybody hasn't heard that one yet, it was excellent conversation. So you're killing it, and I knew you would.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. And yeah, we're going to get into a little bit of my story today because it's the reason that we're going to be transitioning the format of the podcast a little bit in terms of our emphasis. And I guess I'll start with that to say we're going to be transitioning from something that was very broad and associated with the broad spectrum of the health sciences to something that's a little bit more specific to fitness and wellness professionals, as that's what's nearest and dearest to my heart. And that's also where I think I found that this medium could be most impactful for improving human health and human flourishing. And Nate, you actually helped me come to this realization as we were having conversations recently about the direction of the podcast and the direction of Applied Fitness Solutions, which is the company that I started back in 2007 that Nate works for, and just in general, what my mission is as a health entrepreneur and a health educator. And what I came to realize is, although the podcast was doing some great things, and as you said, we had David Katz, we had Cedric Bryant, we had Margaret Moore, I mean, Stephen Hayes, the list goes on and on. I'm humbled and honored to think of the guests I've had during the first 10 episodes. Like you and I were saying, those were guests that you should be getting on episode 150, not episode 5.
Yes, very fortunate to have gotten those folks so early, and it does speak to how much hard work you've done in this field to be able to to reach out to one of those guests and they say, yeah, sure, I'm interested. So again, job well done there.
Yeah, but as I started to have those conversations, I started to really think about how am I truly affecting the change that I want in the world? And I started to realize, although they were great, compelling conversations, they didn't feel quite focused enough to make the impact and the difference that I wanted. And as I started to reflect on that, and Nate, this is where I think you have some great insight into me and my history. My reflection was the area where I've always felt most impactful in, and the area that I've always felt most connected to, is the fitness and the wellness realm. And then, so it was through conversations back and forth with you that I realized that that's really what this needs to focus in on, like a laser beam, is fitness and wellness, and what the wellness paradox really, truly, deeply means to me.
Well, I think the powerful thing is to look at it and go, how can we get like this personal story that each and one of us has, these experiences that we have in our lives. These are some of the most valuable pieces of currency that you can't get anywhere else. So in talking with you and just watching this thing happen, you could already see that you started to sort of gravitate in that direction. And that's a lot of times just going with that gut feeling is going to take you to the place that you want to be. And I think it was just a matter of having the conversation about it and sort of bringing it up. And you said, yeah, gosh, yes, I think actually another way to look at it, there's a question you ask your guests on the Wellness Paradox podcast at the end of each episode. And you say, after having a long conversation, really getting into some deep stuff, you say, okay, so, you've heard me talk about this wellness paradox, about bridging this gap, between what we know and what we can do. What do you say to my listeners? What is your advice? What can they do I almost think you just kind of asked yourself at one point, like, well, okay, I'm having these conversations, but what can I actually do as Mike Stack with this set of experiences? And the answer there is share them with people that are living a similar journey to you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that was, you and I in a conversation we had kind of redefined the wellness paradox. At least for me, operationally, I was defining it as the gap between what we know and what we do in the health sciences. But as I started to think more deeply on that, I started to realize that really wasn't the wellness paradox that I've had in my mind and my heart for over 20 years in the fitness industry. It was, the paradox is the fact that we have this amazing group of fitness and wellness professionals who, in many cases, hold all of the answers to what ails us as a population from an epidemiological and a health standpoint. And yet this group of highly qualified people are completely divorced from the healthcare delivery system in this country. And it's that dichotomy right there that's the wellness paradox for me. It's what I've lived my entire career. And I do want to get into a little bit of my story here in a second, because I think it'll help the people that are listening understand how I arrived at this conclusion. But you and I have been living the wellness paradox for the past 10 years together with AFS. And I was living it, previous to that at Ballitoll Fitness and at other places I worked.
You're right. The answers are there. And that is what I see as the biggest shift is, before it was almost like Mike doing this podcast on a journey to find these answers, but they've been right in front of us this entire time. It's more about how do we actually create this connection? How do we build this bridge? And you, with your experience in fitness and wellness for so long, it's, hey, let's give others this experience and help them to better sharpen their swords, or like you said, focus their laser beams on having a greater impact on overall health, population wide.
Yeah. And so I guess with that said, before we kind of get into a little bit of my backstory, which I think will provide good context for our listeners, it's important to acknowledge that I think prior to this transition, we were offering up content for the health sciences at large and for the discerning health consumer, if you will. Like Meeta Singh's podcast on sleep was amazing, and Stephen Hayes on ACT was amazing. I think people can pull things out of it, and all of the guests have had amazing things to say. Now this transition is going to pivot towards how do we elevate the standard of practice of fitness and wellness professionals to ensure they have the knowledge, the skills, the ability, the connections, the business savvy to actually become a legitimate constituent and stakeholder in our healthcare delivery system in this country. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're someone who's in medicine or someone who's in other aspects of the health sciences, you may still find this very interesting and very compelling. In fact, I hope a number of you do, because we need people on that side of the healthcare continuum to be a part of these conversations and to hear what we're saying. But we're going to focus our messaging and our content largely around how to elevate that standard of practice for fitness and wellness professionals, because that's literally the thing that has been in my heart since I've been 15 years old, when I was an overweight high school kid working out at a YMCA.
We should definitely go back to that time and take that little journey down memory lane so that people can understand where you're getting. A big part of this is going to be helping people to sort of bridge the gap between thinking about a lot of these complex topics and doing something about it. So I would be curious to learn from you almost, we don't have to go all the way back, but maybe the point in your life where you figured out like, this is actually something I want to do for a living. Because certainly earlier in life, it's, hey, this has had an impact on my life and it's helped me. But that's a big difference between just having this as a hobby and then actually taking this on as like a life's journey and a career.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I'll touch briefly on my experience at a young age, because I think it is very formative to who I am as a person right now. And you've heard this story many times. I always kind of laugh when I have to tell this story to an AFS person like Nate, who's been around for so long that knows the story so well. But I was a really overweight kid in high school, and I was someone who was picked on for being overweight. And I think we all can we all can resonate with a period in our life where we felt like we were different and we felt like we didn't belong and we didn't feel safe in an environment. And for me, that was my high school experience. And again, when we're in high school, we're all just trying to get by, right? So I harbor no ill will towards, anyone that made fun of me for being overweight, because I made fun of people for other things. It's that point in life. But I found this little YMCA gym in Westland, Michigan, that I could work out at. This is back in 1993, 1994, which not like today where you could just walk into a Planet Fitness or a Crunch and be 13 years old and work out. Like you almost had to exclusively be 18 at that point to find a place to work out. And I found a gentleman, his name is Al, who mentored me. And Al was the reason that I could even work out there, because I had to have somebody over the age of 18 supervise me. And Nate, this is the part of the story, I spent 4 or 5 hours in that gym every day after school. And it wasn't because of what it was doing for me physically. It was because of what it was doing for me emotionally and psychologically, like even spiritually on some level. And I felt such safety when I was in that environment. And for me, that was really the springboard to a career in fitness. I certainly didn't know where it was going to take me. I worked for Bally Total Fitness in the first part of my career. In fact, I'm actually sitting at Applied Fitness Solutions Plymouth right now, which ironically enough used to be a Bally Total Fitness club that I worked at for a little while, which is a weird kind of twist of fate. And I went to undergrad at University of Michigan, in part why U of M Kinesiology is a sponsor and supporter of this podcast. And I almost went to med school when I was an undergrad. And I remember I was going to go talk to my advisor about going pre-med when I was in kinesiology at U of M. And I was asking all kinds of people like, hey, mom, dad, friends, do you think I should do this personal trainer thing? Or do you think I should go to med school? And of course, what do you think my parents are saying, right? Dude, go to med school. But I just couldn't do it, man. I just could not do it. I could not bring myself, and I didn't realize it at the time. I was 22, 23. You're not that reflective at that point in life. I just knew I couldn't leave fitness. And lo and behold, as time went on, I realized the safety and inclusivity that I felt at that little YMCA gym. I struggled to find an organization to work for that provided that. And that's what led me to start my own commercial fitness business. And as time has kind of gone forward, what I've came to realize is that our industry as a whole is capable of creating that safe, inclusive environment that YMCA created for me. I think that AFS has created. I think a lot of other gyms and fitness centers out there have created it. I just think as an industry, we need to be, and as professionals in the industry, we need to be showing a path to make that happen. So that's a quick historical reference to why I am at the point that I'm at in my life right now, which is realizing that it wasn't enough to just work in the industry for me and make a difference that way. It wasn't even enough for me to start a commercial fitness business and make an impact that way. Now it's gone far beyond that to where I want to impact the entire industry in a positive way. And the only way that's going to happen is by making the professionals in our industry even more qualified and even more competent than they already are.
Yeah, and that's just speaks to personal growth. As you grow, you go from a student to a teacher, and then all of a sudden as the teacher, you're learning again, and then you ascend to new heights. So I think a big part of this is just you realizing, because you also do some instruction at U of M, you're a professor there. So to get to a point where you say, oh, gosh, I have 30 students and I had this message to share and they seem to be responding to it really well. How can I amplify this message? That's a big part. Like, me, I'm a marketing person. So I know that there's a lot of valuable insights inside your noggin. So we're trying to think of what's the best way to proliferate this information out and get it to, maybe there's someone who isn't going to U of M who could really benefit from it, who can just listen to this podcast once a week. Right. So just getting that stuff out there and more available broadly, I think is going to help. And not just from a tactical standpoint, even just from just the camaraderie of the shared experience of what it's really like. Like, I don't think people realize how hard of a decision it really was. You probably didn't know the hard decision you were making when you said, I'm going to go the fitness route instead of med school. It's a completely unknown. It sounds like a lot of fun, but working in this industry is very taxing. So to have someone to listen to, who people that can hear you and say, wow, he actually gets it. He gets this behind the scenes stuff that my members aren't seeing or my clients aren't seeing. I think people are going to respond really well to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think that it's interesting because it isn't the easy path. And for those who are outside of the fitness and the wellness industry, they hear what I do or what members of our team do or our listeners do when they're on the workout floor and they're in the gyms, and they're like, oh, wow, you just must work out all day long and you must laugh and you must have a good time and it must be great. And there are amazing aspects of our jobs in fitness and wellness, but it's also a very hard path. Traditionally, it's not a very lucrative path. It tends to not be a very stable path from a career perspective for many people. Simple things like benefits and vacation and maternity leave, like all these things that are table stakes for any other job in any other industry. In our industry, it's completely devoid of those kind of benefits. So it is an amazingly fulfilling path, but it's a hard path. And I know for myself and for you and for many people that I've worked with, and I think this will resonate with a lot of our listeners, is that even though it's ridiculously hard, it's incredibly fulfilling. And that's what keeps us in it. But at the same time, there are very pragmatic realities that have to be addressed if you're going to be able to have a 20 plus year career in the industry like I have and some of my colleagues have. Like, you have to be able to pay your bills. You have to be able to not work weekends at some point. You have to be able to not work till 9 o'clock at night and then go to bed and then wake up and work at 6 o'clock the next morning. And so there is an element of practicality that this podcast has to address for this to become viable, at least at the level that we want it to be to actually influence change in our healthcare delivery system. So yeah, we're going to talk about the fitness and wellness nuts and bolts from a tactical perspective. We're still going to have guests on the podcast that are the scientists, that are the researchers. We're going to dissect research studies and best practices. But on the flip side, we're going to talk about personal development. We're going to talk about marketing. We're going to talk about branding. We're going to talk about business development. We're going to talk about legal matters. We're going to talk about all the things that exist in the ecosystem to actually make sure you can first survive in our industry long enough to actually be able to get to the point where you can thrive and make this long-term impactful difference that we know fitness and wellness professionals can make.
So much of the education that we get, if we're going to go down this path of a fitness and wellness professional, it reminds me a lot of standard education for the way we educate our children, which is, we're learning a lot of facts and a lot of important science and all this knowledge. But a lot of what's neglected is the perspective and the, how do I scale a business, or how do I keep track of the P&L? All the stuff that we wish they taught us in school is things that we're left sort of to figure out on our own. So that's what I'm really excited about, is to be able to provide some of that insight to people who, like you said, it's a game of attrition. If you can stay in it long enough and let that passion fuel you and pick up these things, you'll do great. But you got to be able to get by, and you got to know how to run a business just as well as you do how to help someone perform a squat properly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And everything has to be woven together, because I don't care if you're a personal trainer or a wellness coach at a commercial fitness center working for somebody else, you're a contractor, you have your own kind of private business, or you're running another facility. So you do have to be able to handle both sides of that coin well. You have to know the technical aspects. You have to know the science. You have to be evidence-based and improve health outcomes. But at the same time, you have to do so in a way that ensures enough profitability and enough stability to where you could avoid the natural attrition that happens in our industry. And I can't tell you, from being in the industry as long as I have and running a company now for almost 14 years in the industry, how much it saddened me to see really qualified, passionate fitness and wellness professionals leave the industry because they didn't view it as something that was a career. And we are never going to be able to effectuate change in public health the way we want to as an industry if we do not have career fitness and wellness practitioners. They can't just be people that are doing this as a hobby or a side job or something for fun. It actually has to be people who are dedicated to this craft. So part of our mission is being able to provide all of that scientific and technical knowledge that's necessary, but also to put that into some sort of a practical vehicle to make sure you can pay your bills at the end of the day and be doing this when you're 40, 50, 60 years old and not have to be on the workout floor for every single second of it if you're in fitness. Because I know at 40, I spent a little bit of time on the workout floor and my knees start to hurt. So I'm excited. I'm excited about this, Nate. I'm excited because it's something that I'm very passionate about, but I'm also excited because this is the right time for this. There's never been a time like this in our industry before. Our industry is so young. Like, we forget that fitness and wellness really has only been a thing since the 70s. Like, we're a relative, I wouldn't call us, we're not an infant anymore as an industry. We're in our challenging teenage years right now as an industry. We're kind of struggling to find ourselves. And I've said this before, our industry has gone through many iterations over time. First, we were all about building big muscles. Like, think back in the 70s and the 80s, it's Arnold and Franco Columbu and all the bodybuilders with their shirts off in Venice Beach. And then you get to the 90s and it starts to become all about like weight loss, like lose weight, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. And then as time goes on, it starts to become more fitness oriented. You think of CrossFit hits the scene and everyone wants to do these really intense workouts. And now we've gotten to the point that we realize that this is something that's so much deeper. It is about health and it's about wellness. And the COVID-19 pandemic really accelerated this transition. And because of all of the deleterious health outcomes we saw with COVID as a result of the comorbidities of chronic diseases, again, go back to episode 5 with David Katz if you want to learn a little bit more about some of those mind-boggling statistics, such as, he mentioned that we have over 500,000 people die every year from poor nutrition in this country. We had a national moment of mourning when it was for COVID, as well we should, but we don't have that every year for the 500,000 people that die from nutrition-related issues. So we're at such an inflection point in our industry, and so many people are coming together. As you know, I'm very involved with the Michigan Fitness Clubs Association, which is the trade association for fitness clubs in the state. The national organization IRSA is behind this movement to become part of the healthcare delivery system. And we're finally starting to come together and we're starting to talk, and we don't feel like we're alone anymore. And we realize that the enemy that we thought existed for years, which was the fitness center or the wellness center down the street, that's not the enemy. The enemy, with all due respect, are the Big Macs and the Whoppers and the couch and the remote control and the Segway, the thing that prevents you from walking. You just get on it and you go. It's the vices and tools of a sedentary access to hyper palatable food society. That's the enemy that we're fighting here. And we're also fighting this challenge of the institutionalized healthcare system, which I have said many times, and I think you would agree with this and many of our listeners would agree, is a very robust sick care system. We do a great job of managing the ill in our quote unquote healthcare system, but we don't do a good job of caring for health. And we won't do that until wellness and fitness professionals are actually part of that healthcare delivery system.
Yeah, so many of these chronic illnesses are multifactorial in nature based on our habits and, like you said, our environments, right? So in order to address those things, it is going to require some sort of unification of all of these different skills and practices in this wellness space to really work on the whole individual. And I'm really excited about that sort of the progression that you talked about with where we're getting to now, because I think just as you had this experience as a young person, yes, you went there to transform your body because you didn't feel so good about yourself. And then as you began to make that transformation, the internal transformation began. And that helped to drive forward all these future habits that were going to help you be a successful human. And we have to have that unified approach where we've got, mental health professionals being able to work with fitness professionals, being able to talk to nutritional experts. All these different things have to come together if we're going to actually have a chance to at least cut down on what we're seeing, the trends being as far as I don't know if you'd call it the global health crisis. I think I would.
Yeah, it's funny. We throw around the word pandemic nowadays in relationship to COVID-19, but as David Katz said, we are in a pandemic of chronic disease on this planet, and we have been for some time, and it's only getting worse. But your point is well taken. This is not something that it's not fitness and wellness versus medicine. And I think sometimes that's how our industries have looked at it, in a very like adversarial binary kind of way. It's either or. No, it's both and in this case. Like, there are certain populations that need medical intervention. There are other populations that absolutely need fitness and wellness intervention. And part of the conversations in these podcasts, in addition to the technical scientific knowledge, the business knowledge, also needs to be how we can sit down as stakeholders on the healthcare continuum, as medical professionals, mental health professionals, fitness and wellness coaches, and have collaborative conversations with each other that actually lead to generative positive health outcomes for individuals and populations. And we don't do a great job of talking to each other right now. There are so many silos and there's so many walls put up. And I realize some of that is necessary because of HIPAA and patient privacy. But at the same time, in my mind, that on some level is just a lazy excuse for good and critical communication. And why we still have to adhere to those patient privacy guidelines, we also need to realize we could shape those policies in a way that make things more streamlined for us as fitness, wellness, and medical professionals, and then more connected for the client or the patient. So there's actual continuity of care. Like, just imagine if your doctor knew what the dietitian was doing with you, knew what the personal trainer was doing with you, and they all figured out a way to communicate. Like, that seems like such a panacea of a state, right? Like, and I say it, and like, it's almost laughable right now to think like that could happen. But if we're going to get to where we want to be with public health in this country, like that is not something that would be nice to have happen. That is an absolute requirement if we are going to improve population health the way we are capable of.
Yeah, I think we just need to level up. This is really the bottom line. And that's a really simple way of sort of getting at what we're hoping to do with this podcast, is to help people who are working in this industry that they share the space with us level up. That's it. So I'm excited for us to be part of these conversations and hopefully drive some of these actions forward.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I guess in kind of wrapping this up, I think what I want to say is that we are part of these conversations. And by part of these conversations, I mean, I'm the steward of this message and this content that we're looking to put out there, but we all need to be a part of this conversation. So to those of you that are listening to this, first off, I would say we appreciate your listenership tremendously, because this thing grows organically, and we're over 1,000 downloads, that's mind-numbing to me for doing literally no marketing and promotion. And I did check, my mom can only download this and have it count for one time. So it's not my mom. My mom hasn't downloaded our episodes 900 times. But secondly, as the steward or the MC of this conversation, I want to hear from all of our listeners. What topics do you want to hear about? What are the things that are most challenging for you? Who are guests that you would want to hear on here? I have a list miles and miles long, 20 plus years in the fitness and wellness industry and interacting with many medical professionals. I can keep pumping out guests and topics left and right, but I want to make sure it's what our audience wants to hear. So you can email me at mike@wellnessparadoxpod.com. There's a contact form on the website, wellnessparadoxpod.com. And I think it's something where we continually want to make sure we're engaging with our listener base to make sure it is the most relevant and engaging topics coming out on a week by week basis. And we're committed to doing this the right way. And I just ask everyone that's listening to help us, hold us accountable to making sure we're always doing it the right way and making sure we're always getting the best guests and the best topics on here. And I'm excited for this journey, Nate. I'm excited for this journey because this is the culmination of 20 plus years of experience and perspective. You mentioned this in the beginning. I was almost a journalism major. when I graduated high school. I thought I was going to be a sports journalist. And this has brought together so many different passions and interests of mine. But the bottom line for me is I want nothing more than to be able to provide people with the feeling that I was provided with in high school from that guy, Al, and that little YMCA weight room. It was a feeling of not just health and wellness, but of self-confidence and self-efficacy and self-actualization and all these amazing things that we know that we can provide to everyone in this country. Only 16% of the American public engages actively in a gym or fitness center membership at any one point in time. We have 84% of the population out there that is not engaging, and we're not going to get that entire 84%. But man, if we can get on the same page as a healthcare delivery system in this country, and we can all speak a common language and operate from common goals, then we have a real chance to effectuate change in a decent percentage of that 84% of the population. And that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited because the time is right. The medium is here. And we at Wellness Paradox are going to do everything we can to make sure that that message gets out there. And we want it to be done in a collaborative fashion with all of our listeners and everyone in the allied health ecosystem. So I'm excited about this, Nate. I'm excited.
I'm glad to see you taking this path, and I can see the excitement, and I don't get worried. I get very hopeful when I see this version of Mike Stack, because he tends to do great things when he has this level of emotional connection to what you're doing. So this is great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone for listening today. I know this was a different podcast. You just kind of heard me go on a 30+ minute diatribe. So for those of you that are actually still listening, I do truly appreciate it. I hope this provides you some context about me and some context for where we're going. And next week, we'll be right back to it with our standard interview style podcast. I'll leave a teaser for later on as to what that great podcast is going to be. I think everyone's going to enjoy it quite a bit, but this is the inflection point for the Wellness Paradox. Now we are focusing on how to elevate the standard of practice for fitness and wellness professionals to ensure we become part of the healthcare delivery system in this country, which is so desperately needed. So thank you for joining us today, Nate. As always, thank you so much for being here to help me tell part of my story, and be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. Until we chat again, please be well.